Welcome to your Level 2 Fitness Instructing qualification, and this is the digestive system. So, here are the objectives for the digestive system. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the structure of the digestive tract, identify the individual components of the digestive system, understand the role of each component of the digestive system, differentiate between mechanical and chemical digestion, and explain the importance of digestion. So let's start off with the basic structure of the digestive system. So the digestive system will start at the mouth, and within the mouth you've also got the salivary glands. Food will then pass through the esophagus, into the stomach, and in the same region you'll have the liver, gallbladder and pancreas. You also have the small intestines, which the large intestines are wrapped around, and they lead into the rectum and the anus. So the structure of the digestive system can be classified into two main areas. You have the gastrointestinal tract, or the GI tract, and organs of digestion and absorption. So the GI tract is a large tube approximately 9 meters long in adults, and this is where ingested material will pass through. So you can think of this as the journey of your ingested food. It will start at the mouth and it will end at the anus. Along this tract, there'll also be organs of digestion and absorption. Now, these all aid in the process of digestion and they facilitate the breakdown of the ingested element. So, looking at the mouth, you'll have the teeth, and think as soon as you ingest food, you will start to chew it to break it down. And in the mouth, you'll also have the salivary glands, which will help to break down food further. Food will also go down into the stomach, where the liver, gallbladder and pancreas will all play a role in helping to break down food further. So, what is the role of the digestive system? So, simply put, the digestive system is responsible for extracting nutrients from what we eat and what we drink. Food will pass directly through the GI tract, and it will undergo processes of digestion, absorption and defecation. Now, this is actually a 4-stage process, which will be discussed in the preceding slides, with the first stage being ingestion, then is digestion, absorption and defecation, because of course we can't digest anything that we haven't ingested. There are several organs that contribute to the digestion of food. Thinking back to the previous slide, these may be things such as the liver, the gallbladder or the pancreas, and this is without food physically passing through them. So these organs will secrete chemicals that will help to break down food, and these can be done within the stomach or the small intestines and the large intestines, because food is a continuous breakdown through the whole of the digestive system. The nutrients extracted from our food, they allow the body to function, grow and repair itself. So this is another role of the digestive system. Through extracting nutrients from what we drink, ultimately what we are trying to accomplish is allow the body to function, grow and repair itself. So we're extracting the nutrients and then we're giving them to the areas of the body that will need them, helping with regular function, helping the body to grow and helping the body to repair. The digestive system will of course also remove any waste products for the body. This is done via defecation, and this is at the end of the GI tract. So the digestive system has 4 main functions. These are ingestion, digestion, absorption or assimilation, elimination and defecation. Now these 4 main functions are what facilitate the main role of the digestive system, which is to extract nutrients from food to allow the body to function, grow and repair itself. So starting with ingestion, this is where food is taken into the body, and this is done in the mouth. The mouth is the start of the GI tract, and this is also where digestion will begin. So digestion is food being broken down by the body, and it starts in the very early stage of the GI tract, so the mouth, and it will continue into later stages. So if you think what happens when you first ingest food, you will start to break it down via chewing, so with your teeth. You also break it down with your salivary glands as they produce saliva, which will break down the food via chemical digestion. And digestion will continue when it goes into the stomach, as food is churned and is broken down via more chemicals, and same into the small intestines as well. This is where absorption and assimilation will happen. So nutrients are extracted into the bloodstream and into the cells of the body to form energy and new cellular material. So this is where nutrients are extracted to allow the body to function, grow, and repair itself. Any materials that we do not need and any nutrients that we have deemed not necessary for the body, these will be removed from the body via the process of elimination or defecation. Now, this is the removal of undigested food and metabolic waste products, and this will happen at the end of the GI tract and exit through the anus. Here we have locations of the GI tract components. So I would take some time to pause this video and just read over each component and the corresponding location for each. And here we have locations for the organs of digestion and absorption. So once again, I would take some time to pause this video and read each of the components and their corresponding locations. So the first location of the GI tract is the mouth. You all know where the mouth is. The mouth is a hollow cavity and it's essentially made up of the lips, teeth, tongue, glands, and the jaw. So this is the maxilla and the mandible. So the two main functions of the mouth are ingestion and digestion. So this is primarily where all food and drink will be ingested into the body. And this is also where digestion will start to take place. And this is done via the teeth and the salivary glands. The teeth will break down food via mechanical digestion, and the salivary glands will produce saliva, which will chemically start to digest food as it enters the mouth. So you may notice that when you see food or something that you particularly like, the mouth will start to salivate prior to eating it. And this is the body preparing its response to ingestion. It feels like you're about to eat. It likes what you're about to eat. So it's preparing to digest it via chemical digestion before you even get to the process of mechanical digestion, which is breaking down food via the teeth. So that will bring us on to the pharynx, which is typically referred to as the throat. Not too much to say on the throat. The main function of it is to temporarily block the airways to ensure correct passage into the esophagus. So the pharynx will receive food from the mouth and it will transfer it into the esophagus through temporarily blocking the airways to the trachea. This prevents choking and ensures that food goes straight down into the stomach where it is further digested. So the main process that happens here is swallowing. The next part of the GI tract is the esophagus. So you may have heard of the esophagus before, and it's broken down into different sphincters. So you've got the upper sphincter, the lower sphincter, and the main point of the esophagus is to move food from the pharynx and the mouth down into the stomach. So these functions are ingestion and digestion, and the main process here is something called peristalsis. Now, peristalsis is the wave-like movement of muscles that will move food along the tube and into the stomach. So if you had a long tube and you put a ball in there, and if you squeeze the tube just ahead of the ball, it will start to move the ball down the tube and out the other end. And this is essentially what peristalsis is. It's what the muscles do, wave-like motions and moving food through the structure towards the stomach. Moving on to the stomach. Now, the stomach is a sac-like structure that sits just underneath the diaphragm. It's responsible for the breakdown of food via mechanical and chemical digestion. So you may be familiar with the fact that the stomach is filled with a strong acid which breaks down food, and this is the chemical digestion component of what the stomach does. However, it also breaks down food via mechanical digestion. As it churns food and mixes it up with the acids, it's also breaking it down via a mechanical digestion. Okay, so it will move the broken down food. So it's broken down the food, and this is called chyme. What it creates is called chyme, and it moves this broken down food, the chyme, into the small intestines via peristalsis, which is the same method that the esophagus uses to move food into the stomach. So it's that wave-like motion of the muscles. So it'll move it into the small intestines, where it will undergo further digestion and absorption. So the main functions of the stomach is digestion, and the processes here are mechanical digestion, chemical digestion, and peristalsis. Moving on to the liver. So the liver is divided into two lobes, with the right lobe being bigger than the left lobe. So if you look at the image here, you have the left lobe and the right lobe, and the right lobe is considerably bigger, and it also holds or hosts where the gallbladder will sit as well. Okay, so the main function of the liver in the digestive system is it will secrete bile to chemically digest food. Okay, so the liver will also purify blood containing newly absorbed nutrients from the small intestines. The main function of the liver is digestion, as it aids in chemical digestion, and the processes in which it does this is via chemical digestion. So it secretes bile into the small intestines, which helps to further digest food, which then aids in the small intestine being able to absorb nutrients from that food, which is then purified by the liver further down the line. And moving on to the gallbladder. So as briefly mentioned in the previous slide, the gallbladder sits just under the right lobe of the liver. It's a pear-shaped hollow structure that sits just underneath that right lobe. And simply put, the main function of the gallbladder here is to store and concentrate the bile produced by the liver. So the liver will produce the bile, and the gallbladder will store it and concentrate it to make it a stronger substance, essentially. The main functions here are digestion, as it helps in storing that chemical digestion element that is used or produced by the liver and then used in the small intestines, and storage, as it stores it. The processes involved are chemical digestion. So next up is the pancreas. Now the pancreas operates as a gland, and it sits just underneath the stomach, attaches to the gallbladder and the small intestines. It has both an endocrine and an exocrine function. The endocrine function is that the pancreas secretes insulin into the blood to regulate blood sugar levels. And the exocrine function is that it secretes pancreatic juices into the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestines, which helps to further down break food. So the main functions here are digestion, and the processes are chemical digestion. Moving on to the small intestine. So the small intestine receives material from the stomach for further digestion and absorption. Now the key thing here is that the small intestine is mainly for absorption. Up to 90% of nutrients from the food that we ingest and digest is absorbed in the small intestine. The majority of absorption happens here. So digestive juices from both the pancreas and the liver, they enter the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine, and they further digest food, and these nutrients are absorbed through the wall of the small intestines, and nutrients are then taken into the blood and transferred to the relevant parts of the body, whether that's for storage or immediate usage. So the two main functions here are digestion and absorption, and the small intestine is broken down into three parts. You've got the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. So the duodenum is where more digestion happens, the jejunum is where the majority of absorption happens, and in the ileum, any nutrients that haven't been absorbed in the jejunum are further broken down so they can be absorbed before they are processed by the large intestines. So the processes here are chemical digestion, segmentation, and peristalsis. So food is segmented along the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, and it's moved along slowly via peristalsis, which is the same method that is used in the esophagus to transfer food. So if you think back, peristalsis is similar to if you had a long tube and had a ball in it, and then you squeeze in front of the ball to push it down the tube. That is essentially the motion of peristalsis. It is wave-like muscular contractions that move food through the tube. So this moves us on to the large intestines. Now, the main job of the large intestines is to absorb water and electrolytes, vitamins and minerals from the remaining chyme left over from the small intestines. So chyme has left the stomach, entered the small intestines where up to 90% of what's needed is absorbed. Then it moves into the large intestines, which is separated into four areas. You've got the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum and anus, which we'll talk about in the next slides. So the large intestines will absorb the water, and it will also prepare the rest of the feces for defecation. So the feces are essentially formed in the large intestines, and some of the indigestible food is fermented here by the microbiota in the large intestines. Now, these microbiota are essentially bacteria, and they will form and produce vitamins which are absorbed into the body. The main functions here are absorption and defecation, and the two processes are chemical digestion and peristalsis. Moving on to the rectum, which is at the end of the GI tract, just before the anus. Now, the main job of the rectum is that it connects the colon to the anus, and it will store feces here and alert you to its presence. And it will also alert you to its presence whether or not it is a gas or a stool. If you are in a position for the contents to be released, then sphincters will relax and the rectum contracts, pushing out any material or gas that is in there. And if the contents cannot, the sphincter tightens and the rectum will hold the stool or gas until you're in a position for it to be released. The functions here are defecation, and the process once again is peristalsis. And finally onto the anus. So this is right at the end of the GI tract. And now the anus is essentially made up of the pelvic floor muscles of the body and two sphincters. You've got an internal sphincter and an external sphincter. Now these ensure that no contents are released against your will, essentially. And the lining of the upper anus detects the contents of the stool, liquid, gas or solid. So the anus and rectum pretty much one sort of whole part, and they play a similar role in helping to store and alert you to the presence of a gas or a stool and whether or not it can or should be released at a certain point. The function here is defecation, and the process is once again peristalsis. Let's talk about the two different types of digestion. So the first one we're going to talk about is mechanical digestion. Now, simply put, mechanical digestion involves physically breaking down food into smaller, manageable pieces. Now, there's a few different places that this happens. The first and most obvious one being the mouth and chewing. Now, you'll all be familiar with chewing. So, when food is ingested into the body, you start chewing to break it down into smaller, more manageable pieces to then be digested in the body. So, this is done via various grinding actions by the teeth called chewing, or a more technical term is mastication. Once the food is broken down, the tongue will push the food towards the back of the throat in something called a bolus, which is just essentially a small ball of the broken down food. This will then travel down the esophagus and into the stomach. The stomach has two different types of digestion as well, similar to the mouth. So you have churning, and this is the mechanical digestion that the stomach does. So the muscles in the stomach physically squeeze and turn the food, mixing it with the digestive juices, and the digestive juices are what chemical digestion will be, which we'll talk about in the coming slides. So this process can go on for several hours until food is turned into chyme. So the process of eating food, it will sit in your stomach for several hours whilst it's churned and chemically digested until it is turned into something called chyme, which is kind of like a slimy material, and the chyme will then enter the small intestines, which is where absorption will happen, and then all the up to 90% of the nutrients will be absorbed in the small intestines. Then the water, electrolytes and vitamins will be produced and absorbed in the large intestines. The second type of digestion is called chemical digestion. Now, simply put, this involves chemically breaking down food via enzymes. Chemical digestion will start at the mouth and continues through to the intestines. Now, each component of the digestive system will have its own or secrete its own enzymes via different organs. So, for example, this process first begins in the mouth, and the salivary glands will produce salivary amylase, which will break down food, the main one being carbohydrates, which we'll look at in the next slides, the opposing enzymes to their macronutrients that they break down. But chemical digestion will start in the mouth via the salivary glands. The body produces different enzymes that are specific to the breakdown of certain macronutrients. So that will happen at different points along the GI tract. Chemical digestion is important for the breakdown of these nutrients into small chains ready for absorption. So we will talk about this in the coming slides, but carbohydrates, for example, will be broken down into polysaccharide chains, which helps them to be absorbed into the body. The enzymes themselves are secreted by glands and the walls of organs. So during chemical digestion, there are different enzymes secreted by different glands and walls of organs that will specifically break down and target certain macronutrients. And this is an ongoing process throughout the digestive system. So just to go over these, the salivary gland will produce salivary amylase, and the location of which is in the mouth. And the macronutrient that is breaking down is carbohydrate. Now these are starches, and these are broken down into polysaccharide chains. In the stomach lining produces pepsin, and the macronutrient specifically targeting is protein. And protein is being broken down into peptide chains. The liver, the enzyme is bile. Location is the small intestines. So the liver will secrete bile into the small intestines. If you think back to the organs that we recapped, this bile is stored in the gallbladder. The macronutrient here is fat, and fat is being broken down into droplets of fat. The pancreas will secrete 3 different types of enzymes in the small intestines. So you'll notice how, once again, most of these enzymes are being secreted into the small intestines because that's where the majority of absorption happens. So amylase will break down carbohydrates further into more polysaccharide chains. Trypsin will break down protein into the peptide chains, and lipase will break down those fat droplets into triglycerides, to monoglycerides and free fatty acids. Continuing with the chemical digestion. So in the small intestines, you'll have maltase, which will break down maltose into glucose, sucrase, which will break down sucrose into fructose and glucose, lactase, which will break down lactose into glucose, and peptidases, which will break down peptide chains into amino acids. So this is breaking things down into their smallest form, where they'll be absorbed through the small intestines into the blood and to the relevant areas of the body. The second brain. Now, this isn't something that is part of the curriculum to pass your course. However, it is definitely something that will serve you use when learning further about nutrition in level 3 and in your personal training career. So, the gut itself is often referred to as the second brain. Technically, this is known as the enteric nervous system, and it consists of sheaths of neurons embedded in the walls of the alimentary canal. When looking at scale, the second brain contains approximately 100 million neurons, and this is more than both the spinal cord or the peripheral nervous system. So if you think there's a hell of a lot of neurons, and that shows you the sophistication of the gut and the level of the information that it feeds back to the brain. So the second brain can control gut behavior independently of the brain. So it's thought that the complexity of the second brain evolved to separate gut function from the standard duties of the brain. So if you think about how much of a nuisance it may be for you to constantly think about what's going on in your gut, and when you perhaps need to defecate, it's a lot of effort for the brain, considering the amount of tasks that you already fulfill with the brain and its role within the body. So having the gut evolved in this way essentially cuts out the middleman and allows for more efficient functioning of the gut. More information is carried from the gut to the brain than the other way around. So the gut often will influence things such as your mood. What you eat will dictate the release of certain hormones, with the main one being serotonin. This information that the gut transfers to the brain is often on the status of our gut and what the brain can do to assist with its functioning. So the gut will often operate independently on its own, but however sometimes it may need to feedback information and will need more of an input from the brain on what to do next and what to do with the information. The gut, as mentioned, has a profound effect on our emotions, particularly happiness and sadness. And as I said, this is to do with serotonin, which is essentially the happiness hormone. 95% of the body's serotonin is found in the bowels. So that shows you the level at which the gut and the bacteria in the gut and the enteric nervous system has an effect on our mood and the importance of it within the digestive system. The microbiota. So within the body there are ecological communities of commensal, symbiotic and pathogenic microorganisms which are found in all multicellular organisms. As humans, we have a microbiota which is a mix of pathogens, viruses, fungi and bacteria located on the skin, which encompasses the nose and the mouth, the genitals as well, and especially the gut. So the majority of this is found in the gut. Now, each individual will have their own sort of unique makeup of these microbiota, and they play a role in the digestion of nutrition, so the food that we eat and how we interact with it, the immune system and how we fight off pathogens and how we fight off viruses and other harmful bacteria. The microbiota is made up of trillions of cells, and this is even more than the human body is. So the microorganisms living inside the gastrointestinal tract amount to about 4 pounds of mass, and every individual will have a unique mix of species of this mass. The amount of genes sort of within this microbiota mix contains around over 3 million, which makes it 150 times more genetically varied than the human body is. Now, with each individual having a unique mix of microorganisms within this,
it can heavily contribute to how each individual person fights disease, digests their food, and even their mood and psychological responses and processes, which is a huge reason to us why the gut is referred to as the second brain. The way these microbiota interact with the food that we eat and the things that we do relay signals back to the brain, which processes certain emotions and affects our psychological responses to certain things. Without getting too deep into the technical side of it, because the microbiota influences the body in numerous amounts of ways and it's very widespread, and there's tons of areas of the body that the microbiota can affect. But the main areas are our nutrition, immunity, behavior, and disease. And this microbiota is something that we begin to develop from birth, from even when we're in your mother's womb. We start to develop this microbiota and these microorganisms within our gut and on our skin, which help us survive. In With nutrition, the microbiota helps us to absorb energy from our food, and the gut microbes are essential in helping us taking nutrients as they break down very complex molecules in meat and vegetables. So, for example, without the aid of our gut bacteria, we wouldn't be able to digest plant cellulose. It also may affect our response to feeling full and certain cravings that we have for certain foods. With immunity, essentially, without our microbiome guests and our host within our gut, adaptive immunity would not exist. So we have an adaptive immunity where we encounter certain bacteria and fungus and viruses, our body learns how to respond after encountering them. And a lot of this has to do with the microbiota that we individually host. And as mentioned, the second brain. So these microbiota will respond to certain activity in the gut to trigger responses in the nerves, the enteric nervous system, which will then prompt a response from the brain, whether that's a psychological response or a physiological response, depending on what is needed. And with the disease, certain elements will influence our how often we may get sick, or how susceptible we are to disease. But one thing in particular that plays a role is the diversity of the microbiota in our gut. That's why it's so important to have a wide and varied diet, especially from a young age, because it harvests a varied diversity within the microbiota. A low microbiota diversity in the gut has been linked to things such as irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease and obesity and even type 2 diabetes. So although these microbiota will give us positive responses and they do some good, there are harmful effects as well if there's a low diversity, and they can cause problems within the human body. To aid in gut health and the positive reinforcement of the microbiota, you have prebiotics and probiotics. Now, both of these will influence gut bacteria in their own different way. First one being prebiotics. So these act as a fertilizer for the good bacteria already in your gut. So these will help to feed and facilitate the growth of the good bacteria within your gut, and are very important in the human body for the reasons previously mentioned. So having that good bacteria and the good microbiota in the gut will help to reinforce a strong immune system, fight off disease, aid in the successful digestion of nutrition and its elements. So prebiotics are a type of fiber that is not digestible by humans, but is digestible by the bacteria in your gut. So certain elements that we cannot digest as humans, the bacteria in our gut will feed off, and it will help them grow and thrive, which will then have positive effects later down the line. Many foods will naturally contain these prebiotics, and it can be taken in the form of a supplement as well. However, unlike probiotics, it is suggested that you definitely try and get these mainly from foods, as there's a wide and a varied amount of foods that will contain them. So the main foods that contain prebiotics are things like your green leafy veg, fruits, healthy fats such as your avocados, all of these things will help to act as a fertilizer for the good bacteria in your gut. So anything that contains a high amount of fiber, such as your green leafy veg, will act as a prebiotic. Moving on to probiotics. Now, these are actual live bacteria that will populate the gut. So different from prebiotics, which will feed and ferment the bacteria already in your gut, probiotics are live bacteria that populate the gut. These help to deliver helpful bacteria to the gut that will help with its effective functioning. Many foods will naturally contain probiotics, with the most popular and recognizable food being plain yogurt. Now, you can definitely get these from your diet, and it is recommended. However, the foods involved with probiotics are less likable, I would say. Less people will eat plain yogurt, for example, than they will fruits and leafy veg. And because they're found in fermented foods, which perhaps are not the most nice tasting to most people. So that reason, they're often taken in the form of a supplement pill, which you can buy in most stores with varied ranges of strength and doses. Let's talk about fiber. So fiber is a complex carbohydrate which is indigestible by the human body. So with fiber, we don't actually digest it, and it's found exclusively in plant-based foods, so your cereals, grains, your fruits, and your vegetables. It's classified as a non-starch polysaccharide, which is commonly formed in the form of cellulose. So cellulose will be the most common form that you come across, however there are others as well. Fiber will help to keep the digestive system in good working order and provides a range of benefits, which we will discuss in the next slide. So, essentially, fiber helps to bulk up your stools in the large bowel, so your large intestines, and move it along the digestive tract quicker, preventing things such as constipation, which is never nice. This helps to reduce our exposure to potentially dangerous compounds as waste is removed from the body more quickly. So as the stools will sit in the large intestines for an extended period of time, we are potentially at risk of reabsorbing some of these dangerous compounds that have been rejected by the body. So being able to bulk them up and move them through the digestive tract quicker removes that risk, and it reduces our risk of harmful exposure. The breakdown of fiber also helps to regulate pH balance, promoting a healthy environment for bacteria. So this goes back to the prebiotics element. It will help to facilitate an environment where good bacteria can grow and thrive, contributing to a healthy microbiota, which then comes with all the positive benefits such as the reinforced immune system, quick breakdown of nutritional elements, absorption of vitamins and minerals, etc. In terms of recommendations for adults, it is recommended that they consume up to 30 grams of fiber per day. So some interesting facts about the digestive system. The average person will produce 2 pints of saliva per day. The small intestine is about 22 feet long when it's stretched out. So that shows you the amount of lining there is, and the journey that the chyme has to go through. Not the saying that it's a 22 feet long journey. It's not, because it's squeezed together. But that's the amount of material and how large this organ is to process and absorb food. The total emptying of the stomach takes 4 to 5 hours. Going back to the digestive elements of the stomach, the churning and chemical digestion, this is how long it takes for this to break down food before moving it into the colon. The transit through the colon itself takes 30 to 40 hours. So if you think about when you eat food, it's not going to be defecated to at least 30 to 40 hours afterwards. And this is how long it takes to absorb all those nutrients from the food and fully break it down before it is removed from the body. The stomach itself will produce 1/2 gallon of hydrochloric acid each day. So this hydrochloric acid helps to break down food via chemical digestion, and you'll produce 1/2 gallon of this each day.
Now we are on to the digestive system quiz. So we have 7 questions. Number 1. The movement of food via a wave-like motion is called what? What are the 4 main functions of the digestive system? Where does most of absorption take place? What is responsible for churning food? Where does chemical digestion start? How many salivary glands are there? And what is the function that removes undigested food and metabolic waste products? So here we have the answers to the quiz. Number 1 is peristalsis. Number 2 is ingestion, digestion, absorption, and defecation or elimination. Number 3, the small intestines. Number 4, the stomach. Number 5, the mouth. 6 is 3, and 7 is defecation or elimination. So here is a recap of the objectives. You should now be able to describe the structure of the digestive tract, identify the individual components of the digestive system, understand the role of each component of the digestive system, differentiate between mechanical and chemical digestion, and explain the importance of digestion.